5 True Neighbor Horror Stories. Story 1. The Man Who Watered My Lawn. I want to tell you about the summer I moved into my first house. I was 26 years old, finally out of apartments, finally had my own yard. It was a quiet street, the kind with old oak trees and mailboxes shaped like little barns. I thought I'd gotten lucky. The house next to mine belonged to a man named Denny. He was maybe 60, always wearing the same faded green cap, always out in his driveway doing something with his hands. The day I moved in, he walked over with a plate of banana bread and told me if I ever needed anything, just knock. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. Too normal, looking back. Then I noticed the lawn. I'd come home from work, and the grass would be freshly cut. Not just cut, edged too, along the sidewalk and around the mailbox post. I figured maybe the last owner had a lawn service still running out the contract. I didn't think much of it. Then one night I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of water running. I looked out my bedroom window, and there was Denny, standing in my yard in the dark, holding a garden hose, watering my flower beds. Not his, mine. I told myself he was just being neighborly, old-timer habits, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so focused, like he was doing something sacred, it crawled under my skin and stayed there. The next morning, I thanked him for the lawn work. He just smiled and said, "Gotta keep things looking right." Something about the way he said right made my stomach turn, but I let it go. A week later, I came home to find my back door unlocked. I always lock it, always. Nothing was missing, nothing moved, except one thing. The photograph on my fridge, the one of me and my sister at the lake, had been taken down and set on the kitchen table, face up, centered, like someone wanted me to see it had been touched. I called the police. They came, looked around, said there was no sign of forced entry, and left. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light on, staring at my own front door like it might open on its own. 2 nights later, I heard footsteps on my back porch. I looked through the blinds and saw Denny standing there, in his robe, just staring at the house. Not moving, just staring, like he was waiting for something. I didn't open the door. I called out through the glass, asked him what he was doing. He smiled, that same smile, and said, "Just checking on the place. Somebody's got to." The next day, I asked around the neighborhood, quietly, carefully. An older woman 2 houses down told me the family who lived in my house before me had left in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no for sale sign at first, just a moving truck one morning and an empty house. She said Denny used to walk over to that house at night too. Said the wife used to complain about him standing in the yard at odd hours, and one day she just stopped talking to anyone at all. I asked what happened to them. The woman just shrugged and said they moved fast, real fast. That was enough for me. I started looking into rentals across town. I didn't tell Denny anything, just kept my curtains shut and my doors triple-checked. I told myself 2 more weeks and I'd be out. Then one evening, I came home and the grass had been cut again, but this time, in the center of the lawn, someone had used the mower to cut letters into the grass. 2 words, my name. Just my first name, carved into the yard in short and long grass, clean as if it had been done with a stencil. I stood in my driveway staring at it for a long time. When I turned around, Denny was standing on his porch watching me. He lifted his hand and waved, slow, like he was proud of his work. I moved out 3 days later. I didn't tell him where I was going. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I paid a moving company extra to do it fast and quiet on a weekday morning while he was usually inside. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. About 4 months after I left, I drove by the old street just out of curiosity. There was a new family in the house. Fresh curtains in the windows, a kid's bike on the lawn. The grass had just been cut, edged along the sidewalk, trimmed around the mailbox post. And Denny in his driveway, his garden hose was already uncoiled, laid out and ready, even though the sun hadn't even started to set yet. When my daughter was born, my husband and I bought one of those baby monitors with the little screen so we could check on her from any room in the house. It gave us peace of mind. For the first month, it worked exactly like it was supposed to. Then, one night, I woke up to static. I checked the screen, and instead of my daughter's crib, I saw a room I didn't recognize. Gray walls, a single bed, a window with the blinds shut tight. I figured it was some kind of interference. Those monitors run on frequencies, and sometimes they pick up other signals in the neighborhood. I turned it off and back on, and the video snapped back to my daughter's crib, right where it should be. She was sleeping fine. I told myself it was nothing. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, the room had someone in it. A man sitting on the edge of that bed, facing away from the camera. He wasn't moving, just sitting there in the gray light, like he was waiting. I felt my whole body go cold. I called my husband into the room and we watched together, and just as he leaned in to look closer, the man on the screen turned his head toward the camera, slow, like he knew we were watching. The screen went back to static, then flipped back to our daughter's crib. We didn't sleep that night. In the morning, we called the monitor company, and they told us the same thing. Sometimes signals cross over if you live close enough to another set. They said to change the channel setting on the base unit and it should stop. We changed it. For a week, nothing happened. Then, one night around 3 a.m., the monitor buzzed to life on its own, even though it should have been off. My husband looked, and this time it wasn't the strange gray room. It was a hallway. Our hallway, the one right outside our daughter's door. And on the screen, we watched the doorknob to our daughter's room slowly start to turn. We both ran. My husband got there first and threw the door open. Our daughter was asleep, fine, safe. Nothing in the room, nothing in the hallway. We searched the whole house, every door locked, every window shut. No sign that anyone had been there. The next day, we found out that 3 houses down, a man had moved in a few months earlier. Quiet guy, kept to himself. One of the neighbors mentioned he did something with electronics for work, security systems, cameras, that kind of thing. We never proved anything. We couldn't. But we threw that monitor away, bought a new one from a different brand entirely, and moved our daughter's crib into our room for the next 6 months. The man 3 houses down moved out about a year later. No warning, no for sale sign, just gone one weekend. When the new owners moved in, they found the garage full of monitors, dozens of them, different brands, different models, all stacked on shelves like a collection. Nobody ever asked why. Nobody wanted to know badly enough to ask. But sometimes, when my daughter was learning to talk, she'd point at her closet at night and say the same word over and over. Man. We never did find out who he was watching for or why he stopped. My neighbor and I never got along. Not from the very first week. His name was Robert, and the fight started over something small, a fence line that sat about 8 inches onto his property, according to him. According to my survey, it was fine. According to the county, nobody could agree, and it dragged on for months. At first, it was just cold looks over the mailbox. Then it turned into notes left on my windshield complaining about noise, about my dog barking, about cars parked too close to his driveway. I tried to be the bigger person. I really did. Then things got strange. I started noticing small changes around my property. A potted plant on my porch knocked over, but nothing else touched. My garden hose coiled the wrong way, like someone had used it and put it back different from how I left it. Little things. Things you could explain away if you wanted to. One night, I heard something outside my window, a soft scraping sound, slow and deliberate. I looked out and saw a shape near the fence, low to the ground, moving along the property line in the dark. When I turned on my porch light, it was gone. The next morning, I found scratch marks along the bottom of my fence posts, deep ones, carved with something sharp, spelling out nothing I could read, just long, deliberate gouges, like someone testing the wood or marking it. I confronted Robert about it. He denied everything, said I was imagining things, said maybe it was raccoons. But there was something in the way he said it, calm, almost amused, that told me he knew exactly what I was talking about. A week later, my dog wouldn't go near the fence line anymore. She used to run right up to it and bark at squirrels. Now she'd stop about 10 feet away, ears back, and just growl low in her throat at nothing I could see. Then one night, the power went out. Just my house. Robert's lights were still on, glowing warm through his windows while mine sat dark and silent. I stood in my kitchen with a flashlight, and through the window I could see him standing on his back porch, perfectly still, staring at my house. I called the police that night, but by the time they got there, he'd gone back inside and the power flickered back on like nothing happened. They couldn't do anything. No crime had technically been committed, no proof of anything. The final straw came about 2 weeks later. I woke up to find my fence completely torn down, every post pulled from the ground, all of it stacked neatly on my side of the property line, like some kind of statement. No note, no explanation, just a clean line where a fence used to be, and Robert's yard sitting open and exposed on the other side, watching mine. I moved out 4 months after that, sold the house for less than I wanted just to be done with it. I heard later that the new owners had their own trouble with Robert, though nobody ever said exactly what. Last I heard, he still lives there, alone. The fence between our old properties was never rebuilt. Sometimes I think about that scraping sound in the night, and I wonder what he was really doing along that fence line all those months. I never found out. I'm not sure I want to. I used to live in a small house at the end of a cul-de-sac, and directly across from me was an old house that had been empty for years. Boarded windows, overgrown yard, a for sale sign so faded you could barely read the price anymore. Nobody in the neighborhood ever mentioned it. It was just always there, quiet and forgotten, like everyone had silently agreed not to talk about it. One autumn, someone finally moved in. I never saw a moving truck. I never saw a face. All I noticed one gray morning were the boards gone from the windows and thin curtains hanging in their place, closed tight. Weeks passed, and I never saw a single person go in or out. No cars in the driveway, no lights at night, except for one thing. Every night, right around 11, a single light would turn on in the upstairs window, and it would stay lit until morning. I told myself it was probably some elderly person who kept odd hours. That was easier to believe than the alternative feeling that had started creeping into me every time I walked past that house. Then I started noticing the curtain moving. Not blowing from a breeze, not shifting from sunlight, moving, like someone was standing right behind it, watching the street, watching my house specifically, since mine was the only one directly facing that window. I mentioned it to a neighbor, an older man who'd lived on the street for decades. He got quiet for a second, then told me that house had a history of owners moving in and disappearing within the year. Nobody ever saw them clearly, nobody ever got so much as a wave hello, and every single one of them eventually just stopped being there. House empty again, without any sign of it being sold or vacated properly. I didn't sleep well after that conversation. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m., and out of habit, I looked toward that upstairs window. The light was on, as always, but this time, the curtain was pulled slightly aside, and I could see the outline of a figure standing there, not moving, just facing my house, completely still, like it had been standing there for hours already, waiting for me to wake up and notice. I stepped back from my window immediately. When I built up the courage to look again 10 minutes later, the curtain was closed, the light was off, and the house looked just as dead and abandoned as it always had during the day. After that night, I started keeping my blinds shut permanently. I stopped parking in my driveway and started using the garage instead, just so I didn't have to walk in view of that window. I told myself I was being paranoid, but something in my gut told me otherwise. About 2 months later, I came home to find several police cars parked outside the old house. I asked one of the officers what was going on, and all he'd tell me was that a welfare check had been called in and that the house had been unoccupied for a long time, officially, on paper. No name attached to any recent purchase. I never got a clear answer about what they found, if anything. The house went back to being empty. Boards went back up over the windows within the week. But even now, sometimes late at night, out of pure habit, I catch myself glancing toward that upstairs window, half expecting to see the light turn on again. So far, it hasn't, but I still don't park in my driveway. I lived alone in a small rental house for almost 2 years before anything strange happened. My neighbor on the left was a quiet man named Walter. Older, retired, always tinkering in his garage. We waved at each other sometimes. That was about the extent of it. It started with small comments. I'd be leaving for work, and he'd say something like, "Off early today, huh?" Which was true. I was leaving 20 minutes earlier than usual that day. I brushed it off as a lucky guess. Then it kept happening. He'd comment on when I got home from the gym, when I had friends over, even when I stayed up late with my lights on. At first, I thought maybe he was just observant, the way some older folks are when they don't have much else going on. But it started to feel less like observation and more like tracking. One evening, I got home from a late shift and found my porch light unscrewed, sitting loose in its socket, not broken, just loosened enough to keep it from turning on automatically like it usually did. I tightened it back and thought maybe it had just come loose over time. A few nights later, I woke up to a soft tapping sound on my bedroom window. I looked out and saw nothing, just my dark backyard and the fence line separating my house from Walter's. I told myself it was a branch, even though there were no trees close enough to reach my window. Then I started finding small things moved. A lawn chair on my porch turned to face my bedroom window instead of the yard. A ladder I kept in my side yard moved from where I always left it to underneath my window, leaning against the wall like it had been used and set back carelessly. I confronted Walter directly this time. I asked if he'd seen anyone around my house. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, very calmly, "You should really get better locks. I worry about you being here alone." Something about the way he said alone, slow and deliberate, made the hair on my arms stand up. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps on my back porch, slow and heavy. I looked through the peephole in my back door and saw nothing but darkness. When I checked my security camera footage the next morning, there was a 20-minute gap right in the middle of the night. Footage completely missing, like it had been disabled and turned back on. I called the police, filed a report, but there wasn't enough for them to act on. No footage, no clear evidence, just my growing certainty that something was very wrong. I moved out 3 weeks later, breaking my lease early just to get away. I didn't tell Walter I was leaving. I had movers come while he was out running errands, and I was gone before he ever noticed the truck. Almost a year later, I ran into my old landlord at a grocery store. She mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Walter had been arrested a few months after I left. Breaking and entering, she said. Multiple properties on that street, going back further than anyone realized. She said the police found a small notebook in his house, filled with names, addresses, and schedules. Detailed timelines of when each person left for work, when they came home, when their lights went off at night. She told me they found my old address written in that notebook too, along with weeks of notes about my daily routine. I never asked to see exactly what those notes said.
I still don't want to know how long he had been watching me before that ladder ever showed up under my window.